Your Honour, I call Helen Watson.
Ms Watson, would you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Affirmation, please.
Affirmation.
Yep.
Would you repeat after me? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat, please.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms Bennett.
Your Honour.
Before I read my statement out, I've got a request of the Chair. This report is reasonably concise and I might find it a bit emotional. So my son can read, if that's okay.
That's fine. That's fine.
Right. Thank you.
Just pour yourself a glass of water, Ms Watson.
The reason I'm making this statement today is I'm pursuing truth and justice for my son Peter.
Perhaps we can start at the beginning. If you just pour yourself some water and settle in.
Yep. That okay?
Now, your name?
My name is Helen Watson, Helen Margaret Watson.
And Ms Watson, you made a statement to the Royal Commission on the 28th of April. And you've made some minor amendments today, which you will read when you read your statement.
I will.
Thank you. Now, I invite you to read your statement. Perhaps if you could tell us your son's name.
Michael Watson.
And perhaps Michael can take over if you would like, and I'm also happy if both of you find it difficult.
If I can read the statement independently, I'd love to.
That's good. Thank you. Now, the contents of your statement are true and correct? I tend to
It'll be Exhibit 2816.
Please read your statement, Ms Watson.
This statement made by me accurately sets out the evidence that I am prepared to give to the Royal Commission into institutionalised responses to child sexual abuse. The statement is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. My full name is Helen Margaret Watson. I was born in 1949. I'm currently 66 years of age. My family was very committed to the Catholic Church. I was raised to respect God and the Church. I was educated in Catholic primary and secondary schools and totally committed to my faith. My family and I lived and breathed Catholic religion. In 1972, I married Tim Watson from 1972 to about 1997. We lived on a farm in the small rural community of Tatyoon with our two sons, Peter and Michael. Our family travelled 40 kilometres to attend Mass at the Immaculate Conception Church in Ballarat every Sunday. The boys grew up with the values of the Catholic faith, and Peter was an altar boy. That was an era I did have. Peter and Michael were altar boys, but Michael was not an altar boy. My son Peter went to Yellow. That was an era I did have. Peter and Michael were altar boys, but Michael was not an altar boy. Peter had a happy childhood and enjoyed playing football, cricket and basketball for the local community. He aspired to be a high achiever in all that he did. After primary school, Peter went to Marion College, which was right near the Ballarat Presbytery. In about 1991, when I was volunteering in the canteen at Marion College, for some reason I had to go to the presbytery with a nun. I think her name was Sister Maria, to collect some supplies for the canteen. The presbytery was next to the church, which was next to the college. I remember that Father Paul David Ryan answered the door. He was reeking of alcohol. From this point onwards, I will refer to him as Ryan, as I hold no respect for that man. This was the first time I met Ryan. I became aware that he was relieving Father Brendan Davey, who was the permanent parish priest in Ararat at that time. Sleep over at the presbytery. In 1991, no, I can't read this.
Okay. In 1991, when Peter was 16, Ryan invited him and some other boys to the presbytery one night. Okay. In 1991, when Peter was 16, at the time I felt honoured and proud that Peter was invited to stay at the presbytery, so I agreed without hesitation. The Sunday morning after the sleepover, Ryan brought Peter back home. I remember the day well, but not the date. I asked Ryan to come in and have some breakfast. He told me he had to go back and say Mass, which blew me away because he reeked of alcohol. After Ryan left, Peter went straight down to his room. Sometime later, I was standing at the kitchen sink and I looked out to see Peter in the paddock, probably 500 metres away. He was physically lifting logs that I did not believe any man could lift. He was building a bonfire. I wondered what was going on, so I went up to him to speak to him. Tears were rolling down his face. And he just said, "Go away, Mum. Go away, Mum." I'll keep going.
So I did.
Oh, right. You want me to keep going? Or?
No, thank you. From that day onwards, Peter was different and his behaviour changed. He withdrew into his room and became antisocial. He became very troubled and started engaging in self-destructive behaviours, such as self-mutilation, drinking alcohol, and then using drugs later. One day at school, Peter kicked down an ornate wooden staircase banister. Another time, Peter grabbed the bus driver around the throat while the bus driver was driving the bus. This kind of behaviour was really out of character. I didn't know what was wrong at the time. I thought it might just have been adolescence, as Peter was the eldest of the two boys. Remarkably, Peter completed schooling. He struggled, but he was quite an intelligent young lad. After Peter left school, he just became transient. He left home and went to university for a year, and he worked part-time at a place called Nuts and Bolts in Altona. But soon he moved from place to place, lost touch with all his lifelong family and friends, and returned home only sporadically. He tried to work, but he was restless and unsettled and found it difficult to maintain employment. Peter discloses the abuse. One day in 1996, when Peter was 21, Peter and I were driving from Tullamarine Airport to the farm. During this trip, Peter told me that he had been sexually abused by a priest. He didn't say who the priest was at that time. Then he told me if I told anyone about this, he would kill himself. I did not raise the subject again while we drove home. Afterwards, I was torn between wanting to breach Peter's trust in me by confronting the church about the sexual abuse and not wanting Peter to take his life. That night, my husband and I found Peter in bed with a loaded shotgun. This was Peter's first suicide attempt that I knew of. That night, we took Peter to a psychiatric ward in Ballarat. After this, Peter needed frequent intervention from psychiatric services. He started seeing a psychologist in Ballarat, her name Kathleen O'Callaghan, about the abuse. In 1997, my marriage with Tim broke down. Tim stayed on the farm and I moved to Ararat. Peter lived between my house and the farm. In 1997, my marriage with Tim broke down. Tim stayed on the farm and I moved to Ararat. He was also on marijuana and attempted to take his life on numerous occasions. There was a 2-week period when Tim drove Peter to counselling sessions with Kathleen O'Callaghan in Ballarat every day. I saw Tim struggle with the knowledge of what had happened to Peter.
During this time, I was continually told by Peter's therapists that he had a predisposition to drugs and suffered from drug-induced psychosis. However, from living with Peter, I suspected that he had schizophrenia.
Peter eventually told me that Ryan was the priest who had sexually abused him. He told me that when he went to the presbytery with Ryan and five or six other boys, Ryan gave the boys alcohol. They watched blue movies and then all played the card game Strip Jack and ran around naked. Later that evening, the other boys went home, leaving Peter and Ryan alone in the presbytery. Ryan was naked and ran a bath for Peter. He sexually abused Peter. I don't want to talk about that in detail. It's too horrible. And then they slept in the same bed until the following morning. Father Brendan Davey later told me that P used to get off the bus on his way to school and smoke with Ryan at the presbytery. He also said that Peter and other boys used to go to the presbytery at lunch times for a smoke with Ryan. Peter goes missing. On the 18th of March 1999, Peter went to the Grampians where he thought about cutting off his penis and throwing himself over a cliff. This was so that he didn't disgrace his parents. He didn't. Instead, he went to his aunt's house and she told him he needed help and that he should go to psychiatric hospital. Peter then went and was admitted to the Grampian psychiatric unit in Ballarat. There he was involuntarily committed. The hospital rang me to tell me that he had been committed. They also said that Peter had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and other mental health conditions. When I heard this, I thought, oh, thank God. I had fought for years to get that diagnosis. 10 or 15 minutes later, the hospital rang me back and said that Peter had absconded. They told me that he had asked to move his car, which was parked outside the hospital. He had tried to leave in his car. When it didn't start, he got out and he smashed it up. Then he ran away. Peter did not contact me after this. As a mother, I knew that he had come to some grief because he almost always contacted me when he was at his lowest. After Peter went missing, in desperation, I went to the Ballarat Presbytery to report the sexually abused by Ryan and to seek help. I haven't got an idea of the date. I do remember clearly speaking to a nun. I cannot remember her name. I was crying and I was out of control crying. The nun said, well, you know, you're clearly not coping. We'll organise some counselling for you. The church organised counselling in Ballarat for me and I went to the St John of God's Hospital where I had the counselling. I remember having a counselling session there and I think I went back for another session. Soon after, the parish priest at that time, Father Brendan Davey, visited me at my home in Ballarat. He apologised for the abuse and said that he had no idea that it had happened. He also said that although there was something different about Ryan, he would not have thought that he was a sex offender. He didn't say what was different about Ryan. He didn't say what was different about Ryan. Father Davey told me that he was not in the parish when Ryan abused Peter. Sometime later, this was another change. I wasn't quite sure about the date, and that was another change. Sometime later, I called Ballarat Police and spoke with a detective, Paul Manane. It was a pretty short conversation, but I told him my son's name and that he had been sexually abused by Father Paul David Ryan in Ballarat Parish when he was a teenager. I told him Peter had gone missing. Detective Manane said, I'll follow it up. I didn't hear back from Detective Manane. I never followed it up myself because my life at that time was hell. I had to find Peter. The police were the least of my worries. After my contact with the church in 1999, I spent the next 6 years looking for Peter. I was beside myself, and finding my son was my top priority. And you can go.
I hoped that he would be alive, but I sort of knew that he would be dead. It's heartbreaking because I just knew that he had come to grief. I was in survival mode. During this time, the police contacted me from time to time because they had found bodies. I had to go in twice and make a statement. Neither of these bodies were Peter. Peter's body is found. In December 2005, Senior Detective Constable John Jess from Ballarat Police visited me at home to tell me that Peter's body had been identified by a remarkable fingerprint match. I later learnt that on the 20th of October 1999, a woman had walked past a boat shed in Aspendale, Victoria, and smelled something. She got her husband, and they looked in the shed and they saw a body hanging in there. The body was naked and painted blue. We didn't know until much later that that body was Peter.
A police officer investigated and concluded that it was death by suicide and that the suicide had happened in about June of that year. The body was decomposed and could not be identified, but a partial fingerprint was taken from a paint tin that was in the shed. A series of missing person bulletins was published, but only in the Aspendale metropolitan area. The connection with Peter's disappearance wasn't made because the bulletins didn't come to Ballarat. Peter's body was not identified, and after a coronial inquest, he was buried as an unknown person in the Melbourne necropolis. About 6 years later, in 2005, the police officer in charge of the initial investigation in Aspendale, Senior Sergeant Rod Owen, was learning how to use new fingerprint identification technology from the United States. He tested the fingerprints of the unknown body with other prints on record, and Peter's fingerprints came up as a match. He told me that he had always been troubled about the unidentified body in Aspendale. He felt he must have had a family somewhere. When the police told me they had found Peter's body, I was sceptical at first because there had been so many wrong hits over the years. Once it was confirmed, we had to fight to have Peter's body exhumed. We couldn't exhume the body without a death certificate, and we had to go to another coronial inquest to get a death certificate. I felt like we had to fight every step of the way. Eventually, we had Peter's body exhumed and he was respectfully buried in the community cemetery close to the family home at Tadioon. The Dice response. After Peter's body had been identified, I approached the Ballarat Diocese again. I met with Peter Bishop Connors on the 21st of February in 2006. During this meeting, I told him that Ryan had sexually abused Peter. A friend of mine was with me at this meeting. Bishop Connors responded in a muffled, monotone voice, "Not him again." I asked for a letter of apology and for the church to cover the costs of Peter's burial in December 2005. I also told Bishop Connors that I wanted every bit of information he had on Ryan. He went over to the filing cabinet and shuffled around for a bit. He then told me that every bit of information he had on Ryan. He went over to the filing contacted by Colin Ryan, who at that time was a detective in the Warrnambool, and he was investigating Ryan in relation to a complaint of child sexual abuse. Detective Ryan is now the Mayor of Moyne Shire. I told him about my visit to Bishop Connors and that he had said there were no documents. I understand that Detective Ryan applied for a search warrant and got documents from the diocese relating to Father Ryan. Father Ryan was later convicted of child sexual abuse offences against other boys. On the 3rd of March 2006, I met with Bishop Connors again. I asked for counselling, which Bishop Connors agreed to. I insisted that I go to a counsellor of my choice, and Bishop Connors agreed. Between March and May 2006, the church paid for me to go to 15 sessions of counselling. On the 20th of March 2006, Bishop Connors wrote to me and offered, as a matter of pastoral concern, to provide financial assistance to cover the cost of Peter's burial. In this letter, Bishop Connors also acknowledged and apologised for Ryan's abuse of Peter. In June 2006, the church gave, in this letter, Bishop Connors also acknowledged and apologised for Ryan's abuse of Peter, burial expenses and the cost of exhuming Peter's body. On the 7th of June 2006, I met with Bishop Connors and asked for compensation from the church for the sexual abuse of Peter and its impact on me. Counselling did not seem to be working and I was desperate to get help for myself. Bishop Connors told me that he was sorry about my son and that I may never get my faith back. But the church had no money and I needed to take some responsibility for my own healing. I was shattered. I remember leaving the building in a highly emotional state. I felt as though the church did not care about me, my struggle, nor the sexual abuse of Peter or the loss of my son. During 2008 and 2009, my counsellor contacted the diocese. My counsellor at that time contacted the diocese and asked them to pay for further counselling sessions for me. The diocese agreed and approved counselling sessions in batches of 5 to 15 sessions in May 2009. There's a new sentence, sorry. In May 2009, I met with Bishop Connors again and he agreed to fund 10 more counselling sessions. After this, I did not approach the church again until 2013, when Bishop Paul Bird was on board. I first met with Bishop Bird on the 3rd of December 2013. During this meeting, I told him that I wanted recognition and compensation for my pain and suffering and counselling. We agreed that I would arrange a further meeting with Bishop Bird to discuss compensation. On the 18th of December 2013, I met again with Bishop Bird. He suggested that we try and resolve the issue of compensation through mediation. Mediation. On the 11th of February 2014, I participated in mediation with Bishop Bird and mediator Greg Rooney. He was from South Australia. We had a morning session where I spoke about how I was feeling. I said that in my opinion the church had minimised everything that had happened and that all they did was offer counselling. In the afternoon session, Bishop Bird said, "Now I want you to tell me how we can help you to heal." And I said, at this mediation, I said, "I want to take 6 months off work to write a book because it is very therapeutic to record thoughts, feelings and experiences. I definitely need counselling, and the way I'm feeling now, it might be for 10 years. And because I struggle with depression and anxiety, maybe some Tai Chi. I believe that would be helpful." And he said yes. The outcome of the mediation was amazing for me. It was a really good mediation. In earlier meetings with Bishop Bird, I felt that he had been defensive and he was totally different in the mediation. He told me that he had never realised the seriousness of the situation or what I had been through. At the mediation, it appeared to me that he had tears rolling down his face. He said, "I'm sorry about all this." I thought, oh well, that is an apology. I walked away from the mediation feeling okay. I thought, I can now get my life back. I'm going to be okay. At the end of the mediation, Bishop Bird said, "I'll get the church's solicitor to contact your lawyer." I gave Bishop Bird the name of my lawyer. I understood the lawyers would talk about the amounts of compensation we had discussed during the mediation. I contacted my lawyer, Graham Hills, from Hines and Partners, about a week after the mediation. He told me he had not been contacted by the diocese or by their lawyers. In April or March 2014, my solicitor, Mr Hills, contacted the church's lawyers to advise them of my intention to make a civil claim against the Catholic Church. We hadn't heard from the church's lawyers after the mediation. I felt I had to go down the civil path now because nothing came out of the mediation. I just couldn't walk away. Over the following months, I had 3 psychiatric assessments. On the 4th of December 2014, Mr Hills, my barrister, Mr Hills, my lawyer, my barrister, Mr Tim Seacole, and I met with Patrick Monaghan, who I understood was the diocese lawyer. Hills, my lawyer, my barrister, Mr Tim Seacole, and I met with the lawyer. I don't know whether that was the right or the wrong thing to do. The diocese offered me $40,000 in compensation and said this was because I had already been given about $11,000. They had it right down to the very last cent. It wasn't just $11,000. It would have been $11,672.21. It was just so petty. I couldn't believe they could be so horrible like that. I had already been given about $11,000 for counselling and for the cost of Peter's burial. My niece, who came to the mediation as a support person, told me not to accept this offer because that amount would not even cover my counselling. This was also agreed to by my two legal reps. There was no settlement at that mediation. My civil claim is still unresolved. Police investigation. In 2013, I gave evidence at the Victorian inquiry into the handling of child abuse by religious and other organisations. As a result of this inquiry, a police officer was assigned to properly investigate what happened to Peter, including his death. I was very, very happy with this outcome. This is another difference here. My husband, Tim, spoke to Detective Senior Constable David Ray from Sano Task Force, who was working on our case. As a result, in April 2014, Tim and I both made statements to the police about Peter's abuse by Ryan. However, we know that Ryan can't be prosecuted for his abuse of Peter because Peter is deceased and there is no hard evidence. That's what we've been told by Sano anyhow. Last year, my son Michael and I went to see Father Brendan Davey. My son asked Father Davey whether he thought Ryan had abused Peter. He paused for a minute and then he said yes. When we asked why, he thought that Father Davey said it was because Detective Manane had told him. I also went to St John of God's Hospital and there was no record of me going to counselling there either. Impact on my life and my family. While Peter was alive, I struggled daily supporting him and watching him. No, I can't read this.
While Peter was alive, I struggled daily supporting and watching him struggle with life after the sexual abuse. I watched his life spiral out of control. Peter had been an intelligent, gentle, fun-loving and beautiful soul. He was respected by all who knew him. After the abuse, he felt worthless, lacked motivation, had low self-esteem with bouts of depression. Peter's tragic journey following the sexual abuse started with escalating antisocial behaviours. Our family became fractured due to Peter's journey of self-destruction, and my marriage with Tim broke down. I started gambling and drinking alcohol. I threw myself into my work because I didn't want to think about what happened. Work, gambling and drinking were my coping mechanisms. I have had feelings of tremendous guilt that I couldn't protect my son. Peter was adopted and I've tried to contact his birth mother, but I haven't been able to. I feel I've let her down. I continue to experience a great sense of loss. I've lost my son, my family, my faith, my happiness. I've endured this struggle for the last 20 years because of the sexual abuse of my son by Ryan.
Apart from the tragedy of what happened to my family, the events also had an impact on my faith. I have lost my faith, which was historically a huge part of my life. I've also lost my trust in the Catholic Church because I felt that it protected the offender but did nothing to protect the victims. I still hold that view today. I feel like I am stuck in this system where the Catholic Church has absolute total control. What do? Do I walk away? I can't walk away because I'm not healed and there has been no justice for Peter. I retired in October 2014. I had a good working career, but when I retired, the reality of life hit me big time. I am now receiving counselling from Amanda Commons Trelaw, and it is the first time that counselling is actually working and has ever been really successful. My recommendations. I believe that Ryan and the Catholic Church destroyed my son. I think that the beliefs of his Catholic education in the Church and our family values, all instilled in him since childhood, prevented him from reporting the abuse. Peter never said anything against Ryan, even after he disclosed the abuse of Ryan to me. I think survivors and secondary victims of child sexual abuse by Catholic clergy should receive financial compensation, and that the amount offered should be determined by legislation so that it is not a decision made wholly by the Catholic Church. I also think the Catholic Church should finance unlimited access to counselling for all primary and secondary victims. I would like to see a system where victims of child sexual abuse by Catholic clergy and their families can receive help independent from but funded by the Catholic Church. For instance, I think survivors should have some form of a card that enables them to access help, such as counselling and medical services, without having to go to the church for help. Every week I go to counselling. Afterwards, I have to go to the DICE office to get reimbursement. It hurts me every time. I have to go back to the church. It hurts me every time I have to go back to the church. I know I need to get the Catholic Church out of my life, yet they are paying for my counselling. Survivors and their families need independence from the Catholic Church.
Your Honours, and Commissioner Watson would just like to make a few more closing statements. Your Honours.
I would like the record to show that I endorse all the recommendations of the previous witnesses at this Royal Commission in Ballarat. I would like to thank the Royal Commission for the opportunity to make my statement today. I make a special thank you to all the compassionate and caring support staff of the Royal Commission. I have no doubt in my mind that I can't read this bit.
I have no doubt in my mind that I will take my unresolved trauma and grief caused by the sexual abuse of our Peter by Ryan and the horrendous cover of the church hierarchy to my grave.
Thank you.
Your Honour, just one matter. When Ms Watson completed her statement, she referred in two paragraphs, 31 and 63, to an inspector, Detective Inspector Murnane. That statement was provided to him and he's provided a response which has been given to Ms Watson by her solicitors.
Yeah.
And as a result, she amended paragraph 31 in the manner she indicated. The original statement had in 1999 and it was amended to
Yeah, it was the date that I wasn't quite sure, but I would have thought that the LEAP database would have that recorded.
I tender a email from the detective setting out his response to those two paragraphs, and copies are available. There will need to be some redactions done before it's made publicly available.
So this is an email from
Paul Murnane.
Make it Exhibit 2817.
Thank you, Your Honour. I have no questions of the witness.
Do we have anything from Detective Ryan?
No.
Who Ms Watson referred to, we'll need to talk about that.
The witness.
Do we have anything from Detective Ryan? I just need to say the same thing, Mr Gray, in relation to Bishop Connors and Bishop Bird.
Yes, Your Honour, and as I've said, the approach that my clients have taken is an approach that applies to all witnesses.
It's a matter for you and for your clients, but I need to say this to you each time, lest there be any misunderstanding in relation to what the Commission may do by way of making findings.
Yes, I'm just observing, Your Honour, that the same issue did arise a number of times yesterday before Your Honour raised it with me today, and the same approach applies. That is, that my clients have taken the view that they do not wish to add to the distress of the witnesses in this hearing where it's difficult enough, and that where necessary, as in some places it plainly is, the people in question, whether it be Bishop Connors or anyone else, will make their response known. My clients, Your Honour, as the Commission would be aware, have had these statements from the witnesses only since about late last week.
Mr Gray, you've had them for time enough to have sought instructions, but those instructing you should... Mr Gray, you've had them for time enough to have sought that the Church has adopted the stance which it has.
No,
It's not relevant
I
to any
understand
finding
that.
which we may be asked to make or indeed make.
I do understand that, Your Honour, but the only observation I would make is that my clients trust in good faith and without any doubt that the Commission would not make findings against anyone, whether it be a church person or anyone else, without giving that person the opportunity to be heard.
Well, that's precisely why I'm raising this with you now.
No, I'm talking about a statement.
Well,
from
no,
the
if you
person.
want, a statement is one thing.
Yes.
But if you want to challenge, or those who instruct you want to challenge what a witness says on a particular issue, that is another thing.
It is. Your Honour, I'm sorry to be taking the time, but the practice guideline requires us to challenge someone where it is to be submitted that that person is not to be believed or has been deliberately untruthful. I do not expect to be making any such submission in relation to any of the witnesses who have given evidence.
Well, the consequence which will flow from that, in the most likely event, is the witness will be believed, and that will found a finding.
Well, I don't want to traverse that, Your Honour, but there will be other evidence one expects, which no doubt the Commission will consider, but I don't seek to say any more about it.
Well, Mr Gray, I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. I'm sure those instructing you do. There must be no misunderstanding about this. These are significant and serious questions as to the way your client has responded to the allegations. That's what it comes down to, and they are issues which we will have to determine having regard to the evidence before us. But if the proposition from your client is that all of these witnesses should be believed, you can appreciate that it's likely that it might be said in relation to evidence that you might bring by others, it might be submitted that they shouldn't be believed. Now, that's a matter for you and your clients.
The submission that I have anticipated, Your Honour, is not that they should be believed if their evidence is different from something that somebody from one of my clients ultimately says. The submission, what I'm observing at the moment is that I do not have instructions at the moment, and don't expect to have them, to challenge any of these witnesses on the basis that they are being deliberately untruthful.
Well, I've said enough, I think.
Yes, Your Honour.
Yes, thank you, Ms Watson. Sorry to delay you, and thank you for your statement, and your son.